Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to continue on with this week's theme of exploring the genre of indie rock, checking out a bit of a more popular group today, Neutral Milk Hotel. They have 1.5 million monthly listeners on Spotify. That number is so much greater than any of the other bands we've checked out this week. We're going to be looking at the track Holland, 1945, off of their album In the Aeroplane Over the Sea. Let's dive into it, see what they're bringing to the table today.
2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Oh, I was expecting something just a hair bit cleaner, and this is just a massive sound. Tons of energy, momentum, drums are tossing in a lot of these snare rolls. The calm response on the vocals and horns. It's an interesting stereo effect being put on the vocals. One of those things I think would probably sound better on speakers and headphones. Vocals, horns, yeah, the calm response is done so well. And it's the same idea too, starting a high note and descends. Really just bouncing back and forth between two harmonic ideas. I kind of hope that goes somewhere to the next track. Yeah. I can get behind this. It has a nice solid groove to it, great atmosphere, fun melodies, great counterpoint, call and response. The thing is that 90% of what I'm going to talk today is probably melody related because the foundation is. It is. It doesn't change, it doesn't evolve, it doesn't modify, it just is. It's static. It has one state. The bass work, the chords, the drumming, all of this is the same from start to finish. There's no tempo changes, there's no rhythmic changes, there's no harmonic changes. We just create the foundation and barrel roll through the song with this upbeat energy throughout. We don't even really have what would be like I don't know, a 4 beat idea, just one single bar to sort of reduce things back a little bit and create some sort of juxtaposition or contrast to the core sound that we have on display here. It is just the sound, the atmosphere driving forward for 3 minutes and 13 seconds. It is, yeah. I think the runtime helps it. This could become very monotonous and draining over a long period of time, and it didn't for the short period that it exists here. Now, with that said, there are so many cool things here that allow the song to feel like it's doing stuff, right? That it's not as stagnant as the foundation is. All of this is melodic. We have the call and response that appears in the chorus. We have the counterpoint that we hear in the second verse. We have the counterpoint that we have at the end between the trombone and the trumpets. We have the harmonies that appear in the horns, that appear with the horns and the vocals. There's so many sections in here where we have multiple melodic instruments engaged simultaneously and playing off of one another in some way, shape, or form. This to me is what keeps the song interesting throughout. Even when we compare something like the first and second verse, we find some variation in how the melody is approached. Not just that the vocalist chooses different rhythmic and melodic ideas, but also that we have the horns in our second verse where we didn't before. I think this is a really slick way of doing this as well, because our first verse is foundation with vocals on top of it, and the chorus comes in starting off with that same thing and sneaking the horns in there on bar 2 as we do the call and response. The vocals come in at the beginning, and then we have the horns come in after them. Really nice way to sneak the horns in here as a supplementary concept to the song. They're there to engage with what we thought was the primary and only singular melodic instrument, was the vocals. So the horns come in and they support what the vocals are doing, but then the horns become a key element of the track. In verse 2, they continue to be present and provide counterpoint against what the vocals are doing. We have variation on this idea in 2 ways. Our lead melody from the vocals are doing something different, but there's counterpoint going along with them. It's just a really fascinating way of evolving the melody where the song has no evolution at all. It allows for some sort of contrast, some sort of dynamic quality to the track that isn't found elsewhere. Now we do move from the second verse into the chorus, which is exactly what I would expect out of it, into an extended bridge outro, focusing primarily on starting out with a new vocal line with new horn work, and then the vocals dipping out entirely, bringing in this lower horn, which I think is the trombone, and the trombone and the trumpets are what take us out towards the end of the song, and we end with a bit of a swell. We hit a note, kind of rises in volume, and I believe that takes us to the next track as it runs right up to the end of the song. Yeah, there is a lot of cool sounds in here from a compositional standpoint, but also just from an overall sonic standpoint. This is kind of ska-ish. We have a rock band with brass on it. You don't get more ska than that. It's also very upbeat, very bouncy. You can skank to it. It's ska, right? But the thing is that timbre-wise, a lot of this was beyond my expectations. When we kicked the song off, we had more acoustic sounding instruments. I think we heard like a guitar strum, and then we heard drumsticks hitting each other. And I was like, okay, we had the vocals come in with their sound that I kind of think doesn't match with their singing sound, but we'll get to that in a second. A lot of things are set up here, and after this 1 to 2 bar intro idea, we bring in the distorted guitars, right? I was not expecting this. It's so far a deviation from what they sort of present themselves in their little warm-up section of the track. But then the brass comes in later, and it works compositionally and even in a sort of sonic way as well, but I'm just not used to hearing these heavy, blown out, distorted guitar tones with the brass like this. I think it works well in the long run, something that I'd have to acclimate to, but it just wasn't. I've never heard anything like it. It's like ska mixed with the low fidelity guitar tones of indie rock, and it's interesting. Speaking of sounds that I wasn't expecting, the vocals. There's something very nasally about the vocal delivery that again I didn't quite get from the count off at the beginning of the track. It's not bad, but it does take some getting used to. There's an acclimation period to it. But I also noticed something about the vocal work that is kind of hidden in all of the fuzz and noise of it all. And that's a lack of being in tune. It's consistently out of tune, which, like I said, a lot of the instrumentation covers it up, the production of it covers it up, and it's also a fast song. The vocalist very rarely hangs on to a note, so you don't really have a chance to notice it. However, when the vocalist does hang on to notes, it's quite apparent if you're listening for it. Otherwise, I think it's really easy to ignore it. It's one of those qualities that I think comes from both punk and indie rock in a way that it just fits the sound because so many bands have done this in with a similar vibe. I'm used to it. I kind of expect it from something like this, but it still stands out to me in a few of the sections. And it's just like, okay, you're a little flat there, but I guess we can just ignore it. And as like I said, as long as you're not listening for it, I don't think you'll hear it. But when you do, you realize that the vocalist just isn't quite up to snuff at landing on a note specifically in tune and holding that out. There's a bit of warble to it. Sometimes it's just flat to begin with. Sometimes it's a little sharp to begin with. But the song definitely facilitates it in a way that allows to cover up as much of that um, intonation issue as it can. So again, it's one of those things that I don't think is too much of an issue, but is something I'm particularly listening for because I'm being critical about it. You know, I'm using my active listening skills here. So I think that about wraps us up. We have a single topic, single musical vibe. All of the variation is done on the melodic aspect of it, and it is a jam to listen to. I feel like this was a bit more of 50-50 as far as positive and negative criticism, but I did enjoy it. In the moment, I think every aspect of this works, and I had a blast listening to it. It would be something that I wouldn't mind listening to more of, especially now that I know what I'm in store for. But if every song is something like this, which I don't mean to extrapolate this experience, but if every song in the album is a singular foundation with a bit of melodic evolution over it, I don't know that it's going to work for me for an entire album. Well, the album's only 40 minutes, so I don't know, maybe I could do that. 1998. Dang. Alright, let's check out some lyrics, see what's going on there. I know it's kind of a running gag, probably, that I come into these sections saying, I don't really know what's going on in the lyrics. But I think this one, it's warranted. This song talks about a lot of stuff that requires more information about a few topics, some of it personal to the lyricist. It starts off exploring Anne Frank. Says the only girl I've ever loved was born with roses in her eyes, but then they buried her alive one evening, 1945, with just her sister at her side, and only weeks before the guns all came and rained on everyone. It alludes to Anne Frank after this point, here and there, but for the most part, that is the only portion of the track that specifically talks about her. And it's still even a little bit vague there, never specifically name dropping. From here, it introduces a very interesting concept. Now she's a little boy in Spain, playing pianos filled with flames. The second concept is being introduced here, that of reincarnation, something that is explored later in the chorus, but now we must pack up every piece of the life we used to love just to keep ourselves at least enough to carry on. This chorus can be related back to having to hide, as Anne Frank did, packing up every piece of the life you used to love and having to go do something different now. Just trying to carry on. But it also wraps into the idea of reincarnation, of trying to keep a piece of who you were in a past life in order to carry on with the life you are, to explore a new area. Verse 2 starts with riding a circus wheel. I read this as maybe a merry-go-round, but I think the idea is the same, of being on something that just goes in circles. Life and death cycle, reincarnation. I'm going to be honest, reincarnation is not a topic I would have come to the conclusion on having read this, but there are plenty of annotations on Genius going in this direction, so if nothing else, it is a widely held fan theory if it isn't in fact even the correct reading of it. Not too long later in verse 2, is it verse 2? Yes. With your dark brother wrapped in white, says it was good to be alive, but now he rides a comet's flame and won't be coming back again. I don't know if that's really what he said, but it rhymes with flame, so I wanted to do it that way. Anyways, this speaks about, more of a personal level, a friend of Jeff Magnum, who wrote this song and is the guitarist and vocalist. Alright, so I'm starting to piece things together here. A friend of Jeff's, according to this, committed suicide. And so this song brings back this topic frequently as well. And so those are our three main thematic ideas here. Is Anne Frank hiding from the Nazis in 1945, Jeff's buddy who committed suicide in the 1990s, presumably, and reincarnation. And that's what I mean by this song's kind of all over the place, why it's difficult for me to get a grasp on what it's about. I do think that the general idea here is represented in verse 3, right before we move into the horn extended solo section. It takes us out of the track. It says, and here's where your mother sleeps, and here's the room where your brothers were born, indentations in their sheets, where their bodies once moved but don't move anymore, and it's so sad to see the world agree, that they'd rather see their faces filled with flies, when all I'd want is to keep white roses in their eyes. The idea being that the world is filled with pain and suffering and death, and that it seems to Jeff here that seems to be what the world wants, that happiness and allowing people to retain their innocence and life is not something that the world naturally pushes towards. And he expresses a great dissatisfaction and sadness having come to that realization. And I think this is where the parallels between his friend's suicide and Anne Frank's old untimely death come together. And of course, using Anne Frank not just as a specific person, but also a vehicle for some of the most atrocious things that have happened in human history, a mass genocide, looks at how the world is and brings it together that death is something that they're very much opposed to, as I think most people are, but Jeff specifically sings here that he wishes that this wasn't the way things worked. He just wants people to be happy, and be alive, and enjoy life. And it makes me wonder where the reincarnation angle comes in. Is it that he hopes that these people get a second chance at happiness? I don't know. But I do find this to be lyrically quite heavy and dense in a way that the music absolutely does not present itself to be. I found this to be a very happy, bouncy, dancey track, wanted to move your body to, and it is paired with some exceptionally heavy lyrics about some philosophical topics. And I find that to be an interesting combination. I wonder if anyone has an interpretation on the contrast. I know we've talked about in the past dancing through your pain, having happy music with sad lyrics, but I think this goes beyond that just a little bit. This is light-hearted music with heavy, dense lyrics. It's not necessarily just pairing happiness and sadness, it's kind of pairing carefreeness with being weighed down by the world. There is a stronger contrast there that I think, at least for me, is harder to recognize unless it's going along the same lines as Dancing Through the Pain, and it's finding a way to explore some of these heavier topics in a lighter mood. But I feel like there might be something a little more here than that. Or, it could also just be this is the music they make and this is what Jeff wanted to sing about and they just smashed the two together and there is no more deeper thematic reason than that. I don't know. Those are my thoughts. Holland 1945 by Neutral Milk Hotel. Let me know. Did you enjoy this track? You have your own interpretation of it, perspectives, or opinions? Toss all that stuff down in the comment section. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. It'll take you to this menu right here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. That's, okay. Fantastic. We do have a special selection coming up today. Otherwise, I'll be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 p.m. UTC as usual. We're going to wrap up this week's theme of indie rock. Until next week, until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos.